If you grew up in Britain between 1956 and the 1980s, there was a good chance your bedroom floor was covered in them. The die-cast cars with the windows, the James Bond Aston Martin with the ejector seat, the Eddie Stobart lorry your dad bought you at the motorway services. Corgi Toys, the little Welsh company that became one of the most beloved toy brands in British history, and the story of how it was nearly lost forever. In 1933, as storm clouds gathered over Europe, two men boarded a train bound for England. Philip Ullmann and Arthur Katz, both Jewish, both veterans of the Nuremberg toy industry, left behind everything they knew. The rise of Hitler had made their home and their livelihoods untenable. Arriving in Britain with little more than experience and determination, they found refuge in Northampton, where Bassett Loke, a local model train maker, offered them a corner of his workshop. There, among the smell of oil and metal shavings, they began again. Ullmann, once a director at Tip & Company, brought with him the secrets of tin plate toys and the memory of a vanished world. They called their new venture Mettoy, short for Metal Toy, and by the end of 1933 the company was officially registered. The first years were lean, but the workshop on Stimpson Avenue grew steadily. By 1939, Mettoy employed around 600 people, turning out a range of wind-up tin plate cars and mechanical figures. Each toy was a small act of rebuilding, a testament to survival and to the possibilities of a new homeland. The outbreak of war in 1939 changed everything. By 1941, civilian toy production stopped entirely. The Mettoy factory shifted to the war effort, producing shell carriers, munitions boxes and aircraft parts for the Ministry of Supply. The toys would have to wait. In 1944, Mettoy secured a lease on a newly built plant in Forest Fash, Swansea, a site originally intended for military contracts. This move, first made out of necessity, would shape the company's future. After the war, the Swansea factory became Mettoy's permanent home, opening officially in April 1949. For Ullmann and Katz, the journey from refugees to factory owners had spanned less than 2 decades. But it was a journey marked by loss, resilience, and the hope that a small British toy could carry something of their story forward. By the late 1940s, the world was rebuilding, and so was Mettoy. In 1948, a new line appeared on British shelves. Castoys, cast aluminium clockwork cars made for Marks and Spencer. These were sturdy, simple, and unmistakably modern, an early glimpse of what was to come from the Swansea factory. But it was the arrival of Marcel van Kleemput in January 1954 that would truly ignite Mettoy's next chapter. Van Kleemput, a young French-born designer, brought with him a flair for detail and a vision for something beyond the tin plate toys of the past. He sketched, he tinkered, and he imagined a miniature world where cars weren't just solid lumps of metal, but tiny reflections of the real thing. The result was a leap in both style and engineering. Van Kleemput's first major project was a model of the Ford Consul, an unassuming family car, but rendered with crisp lines and, for the first time, transparent plastic windows. This detail was more than a gimmick. Until then, die-cast cars were closed worlds. Corgi's innovation let children peer inside, see tiny dashboards and seats, and imagine themselves behind the wheel. The slogan said it all: the ones with windows. In July 1956, Corgi Toys launched officially from the Swansea plant. The timing was bold. Britain was still recovering from rationing, and the toy market was crowded with post-war hopefuls. Yet within a year, 2.75 million Corgi cars had been sold. The brand's identity was set: bright boxes, clever features, and a promise of something just a bit more special than anything else on the shelf. For Van Kleemput, each new design was an exercise in imagination and precision. For Mettoy, it was proof that technical ingenuity, married to the right story, could turn a Welsh factory into the heart of a national obsession. The mid-1960s saw Corgi Toys reach a level of fame few toy brands ever achieve. In 1964, the Aston Martin DB5 from Goldfinger appeared on shop shelves, its silver finish gleaming, packed with gadgets that seemed impossible in miniature. Pop-out machine guns, a rear bulletproof shield, and the legendary ejector seat. This was not just a toy, it was a piece of cinema, recreated in die-cast metal for every child's bedroom floor. By 1968, nearly 4 million DB5s had been sold worldwide, a number that still stands as a record for a die-cast car. The formula worked so well that Corgi repeated it in 1966 with the Batmobile, timed perfectly with the explosion of Batman on television. The Batmobile came loaded with rocket launchers, a chain-slicing blade, and a flaming jet exhaust. Children queued in toy shops across Britain and beyond, and by the end of its production run, almost 5 million Batmobiles had left the Swansea factory. These were not just toys, they were passports into the worlds of James Bond and Gotham City. And every detail, from the Bat symbol wheels to the working gadgets, was designed to fire the imagination. Recognition came at the highest level. In 1966, Corgi won the Queen's Award to Industry, an honour reserved for companies that set new standards in British manufacturing. That same year, the National Association of Toy Retailers named Corgi the Highest Standards Award winner, cementing its place as the gold standard of the toy world. For a generation, these models became cultural touchstones, as much a part of childhood as the films and toy TV shows they brought to life. The bar had been set almost impossibly high. Every new release was expected to be not just good, but iconic. At the height of its powers, the Corgi operation in Swansea was more than just a toy factory. It was a world in miniature, humming with the energy of 3,500 workers. From the late 1960s through the early 1970s, the plant's 4 production halls ran day and night, their lines packed with men and women stamping, painting, assembling, and boxing up the dreams of a generation. The numbers alone are staggering. In 1968, nearly 10 million Corgi models left the Welsh valleys for markets as far-flung as the United States, West Germany, and Australia. Each model, whether a humble family saloon or a gleaming Bond DB5, was a tiny ambassador for British craft. Swansea's workforce came from across South Wales, entire families sometimes working side by side. For many, a job at Mettoy meant a steady wage and a sense of belonging, especially in a region still haunted by the decline of coal and steel. The factory's scale rivaled the great car plants of Birmingham or Coventry, yet its output fit in the palm of a child's hand. The pride of the line was the truck range. Robust models from AEC, Bedford TK and Leyland, and later the distinctive Eddie Stobart lorries, their green and red liveries instantly recognisable on roads and in toy boxes alike. Securing the Eddie Stobart licence in the 1970s brought a new realism to the models, linking the miniature world to the trucks rumbling up and down Britain's motorways. Exports became the company's lifeblood. By 1968, Corgi's global shipments were unmatched by any British rival, with almost 10 million models heading overseas in a single year. This vast reach helped fund the technical wizardry and high-profile licenses that made Corgi a household name. Yet behind the statistics, the Swansea plant was a community, one where the rhythm of the assembly line shaped daily life, and where the fortunes of a British toy brand were inseparable from the hopes of an entire region. In the late 1960s, a new kind of competition rolled onto British shelves. Mattel's Hot Wheels, with their blazing colours and low-friction axles, promised speed that left traditional die-cast cars trailing. Hot Wheels didn't just look different, they raced across plastic tracks, outpacing anything the Swansea factory could produce. For Corgi, the challenge was immediate and unsettling. British models, known for their detail and weight, suddenly seemed slow, even old-fashioned beside the American imports. Product managers at Mettoy watched as market share began to slip. Children wanted cars that flew off the kitchen table. In 1970, Corgi answered with Whiz Wheels, a new line built for speed, fitted with friction-reducing wheels in bright, modern colours. The decision sparked heated debate inside the company. Could Corgi keep its reputation for realism while chasing the thrill of velocity? The Whiz Wheels models sacrificed some of the intricate features that had defined the brand, but they delivered the speed children now demanded. For a while it worked. Sales steadied and Corgi held its ground on the playground and in the shops. But the pressure didn't stop there. Cheap die-cast imports from Hong Kong and, later, China began to flood the market. These models sold for a fraction of the price, undercutting the cost of Welsh-made toys by as much as 40%. Retailers, squeezed by the economic downturn, stocked more of the cheaper imports. The value that once set Corgi apart, British engineering, careful detail, a sense of weight in the hand, grew harder to defend as price became the deciding factor. The golden age of Corgi was giving way to a new era, one where speed and cost ruled the toy aisles. In 1982, Mettoy's leadership made a fateful decision. With home computers taking British headlines, they launched Dragon Data Limited, pouring much of the company's cash into the new Dragon 32 and Dragon 64 computers. The hope was simple, that a leap into electronics would secure the future just as die-cast had once done. But the gamble drained the reserves that kept the Swansea lines running. The Dragon computers rushed to market, struggled against rivals from Sinclair and Commodore. Losses mounted quickly, and the funds that once paid for zinc, paint and the wages of skilled Welsh hands now vanished into a market Mettoy barely understood. By late 1983, the numbers no longer added up. Production at Swansea slowed, then stopped. Unpaid invoices piled high from steel suppliers and plastics firms to the studios who licensed their famous cars. On November 19, 1983, the receiver's report spelled it out. Liabilities of over £5 million, with only the Corgi name and its moulds left as valuable assets. Swansea's 4 halls, once alive with the clatter of presses, fell silent. For the workers, for the families who had built their lives around these miniature cars, it was the end of an era. The company that began with 2 refugees and a borrowed workshop now stood on the edge of disappearance, undone by a single costly detour into the world of home computers. On 29th of March 1984, a small group of former Mettoy managers gathered in a solicitor's office and signed the papers that would give Corgi a second life. With the Swansea factory shuttered and the old company in receivership, the management buyout was both a rescue and a gamble. The new entity, Corgi Toys Limited, acquired the name, the tooling and the rights to a catalogue that had shaped childhood across Britain. But the world around them had changed. The workforce was a fraction of what it had been, and the new team faced a market transformed by foreign imports and shifting tastes. Their first task was survival, to keep the brand alive, preserve what could be saved, and convince retailers that Corgi still meant something on the shelf. For 5 years, the company operated independently, focusing on smaller production runs and higher quality models aimed at collectors as much as children. Yet the pressures that had brought Mettoy down had not disappeared. The die-cast market was now dominated by global giants, and the cost advantages of Asian manufacturing made it impossible to compete on price alone. In December 1989, the American toy giant Mattel stepped in, acquiring Corgi for an undisclosed sum. The deal folded Corgi into a portfolio that already included Matchbox and Dinky, bringing 3 of Britain's most storied die-cast names under one American roof. Mattel's strategy was clear. Reposition Corgi as a premium brand, emphasise nostalgia, and target adult collectors who remembered the golden age of British toys. New packaging, limited edition releases, and cross-promotion with Matchbox and Dinky followed. But the old world of British toy manufacturing was gone for good. Under Mattel, Corgi's production shifted further away from its Welsh roots, and the brand itself became one piece in a much larger corporate puzzle. For those who remembered the Swansea factory's clatter and the pride of a British-made toy, it was a bittersweet continuity, a famous name but a different era. By the mid-1990s, Corgi's story took another turn, one rooted in memory as much as in business. After years under American ownership, the brand returned to British hands. In 1995, a consortium of collectors and enthusiasts acquired the rights from Mattel and set up shop in Leicester. The new company, Corgi Classics Limited, was built on a simple idea that nostalgia itself could be a business model. production shifted to limited edition models, each carefully numbered, each box designed to evoke the golden age of British motoring. The move to Leicester signalled more than a change of address. It was a deliberate step toward reclaiming the brand's heritage, trading mass-market battles for the loyalty of adult collectors who remembered the feel of die-cast metal in their hands. This collector focus shaped every decision. Rather than chasing toy shop shelves, Corgi Classics concentrated on detailed releases, vintage buses, British trucks, and the perennial Eddie Stobart lorries. Crafted for display as much as for play, special editions commemorated royal events, anniversaries, and the icons of the British road. The company's catalogues grew thick with nostalgia, each new run a tribute to the models that once rolled out of Swansea. For a generation who had grown up with Corgi, these were more than toys, they were fragments of a vanished world, preserved in miniature. Yet the market for heritage brands was changing too. On May 1st, 2008, Hornby plc, the storied maker of model railways and airfix kits, announced the purchase of Corgi for £8.3 million. The deal brought Corgi under the same roof as other British icons, promising investment and stability. Hornby's stewardship has kept the collector spirit alive, anchoring Corgi within a stable of classic names and focusing on limited edition releases that speak to the brand's legacy. Today, Corgi's future rests on this careful balance, honouring the past, serving the collector, and holding fast to the idea that some stories, like a die-cast car on a bedroom floor, are worth preserving. Factories like Swansea's once made Britain's dreams in metal. They were the work of refugees who found a home and built an icon. Today, Corgi survives as nostalgia and collector's pride, a reminder of what industry, innovation and hope once forged together. As Britain's manufacturing world recedes, its legacy lives on in every miniature. Share your favourite Corgi memory below, and if you love stories like this, do not forget to subscribe.